Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
Ooh, lucky bug.
Are you being sarcastic or something, Martin?
Fool, you should never mix your drinks.
What, are you retarded?
We'll have to take this abuse much longer.
You're a fool! You're a fool! You're a fool!
Oh, that's what we call diarrhea.
You think this is a fucking joke? This ain't Kenny camera. There's no hidden cameras.
Oh shit, I've said fuck, oh fuck, I've said shit.
Don't be an arse. Get a weapon collector, Ross.
I could knock him out in the shed.
Are you kidding me? That is crazy.
I'm pissed off. I'm sad. I'm ashamed.
Stop it, please. For God's sake, please stop it. There's no more time.
Is this not why you are here?
Good evenings, my lovely. I'm DC Hadafew. I'm here to tell you a couple of stories. You'll see I'm in disguise. This is because I'm deep undercover since we discovered the nether regions of the Spiroverse. Several weeks ago, we discovered the existence of the Spiroverse. Me and a few others have been investigating the things that occur down deep in the nether regions of the Spiroverse. This book is an account of one story of such a place. I hope you're sitting comfortably, because if you're a wrongdoer, this will be the last moment in your life that you feel the comfort you feel right now. Beware the Spiroverse. Arnold Finch was not a happy man. He had thought when he purchased Daphne Ellis's debt from the bank that he'd be able to swindle her out of some valuable antiques by undervaluing them. But the old bag didn't have any antiques. All she had was a very few slightly interesting looking items and a load of tat. Oh well, he'd just have to take the best looking pieces, not telling her what they might really be worth of course, and see what he could get for them. He should be able to make a bit of profit. He sighed heavily and pointed to a door. "What's in there?" he asked. "That's my children's bedroom. There won't be anything in there that you're interested in. Just some old toys," Daphne told him. Old toys? Arnold thought. Some of those might interest some collectors I know. And then another thought occurred to him. "Why don't you ask your children to pay off your debt?" he asked. Daphne's eyes started to fill, and then a couple of tears rolled down her cheeks. "My children passed away many years ago, sir," she told him. Arnold had to admit he liked the way she called him sir. That wasn't what most people called him, although some of the names they called him did indeed start with an S. "They were killed in a car accident, along with their father, when they were only 7 years old. You see, there was this van driver who—" Yes, I'm sure it's all very sad," Arnold told her. "But that's unimportant. I need to see what's in there." Then he pushed the door open and stepped into the room. When he stepped into the room and looked around, his eyes widened in surprise. The room looked as if it was still in use, with the beds made up, ready to be used, the toys laying on the floor as if they'd only just had someone playing with them. And then he smiled. Some of those toys looked quite old. The toy cars might well be worth something, and those Action Man figures, well, they might make a few quid as well. But it was the teddy bears and the dolls that really interested him. Some of them were probably handed down from older family members and could be pretty valuable. And that old train set was probably worth a couple of hundred, if not more at least. Arnold quickly calmed himself down, took a deep breath and sighed. "Well, let's see what we have here," he said, trying to sound disappointed. "I suppose some of these might be worth a few pounds." Daphne looked at him with horror in her eyes. "Oh no, sir, not my children's toys. Please, sir, not them." Arnold gave her a stern look. "Mrs. Ellis, you owe £450. We have to get that debt down a bit, don't we?" "I explained to the bank why I got behind with my payments," Daphne told him in a quiet voice. "It's not really my fault. The people who I did cleaning for moved away and I haven't been able to get a replacement for them yet." You're not dealing with the bank now, Mrs. Ellis, Arnold told her. They passed your debt on to me. He spread his hands and tried to look innocent. And I'm not a rich man. A complete lie. Arnold was really quite wealthy. And I have to eat just like everyone else. Daphne's expression made it quite clear that in her opinion he probably relied on the fresh blood of young virgin girls for his sustenance, but she said nothing. Arnold didn't like that look at all. It annoyed him, and he decided to make her pay for it. Well, now we have that sorted, let's just see what we have here, shall we? He said, doing his best not to let his annoyance show. He went round the room, picking up the toys and making little disappointed sounds. He put the train set, toy cars, the dolls and the teddy bears into a neat pile. I might be able to get perhaps £4 or £5 each for these, I suppose, he lied. I don't suppose you have the boxes for any of them, do you? I have the boxes for the cars, Daphne told him. My husband liked to keep them. He never said why, though. Well, some people just like to keep them for some reason, I don't know why. Arnold lied. Perhaps you could get them for me. It will help me transport them. Daphne left the room, saying, I'll see if I can find them. I think they're under the stairs. As soon as she left the room, Arnold grinned. He noticed that a couple of the bears were by Steve and looked pretty old. He had a feeling that the big white one might even pay off the debt on its own, and the train set and the toy cars would no doubt provide him with a handsome profit. He noticed some very collectible ones, including 1960s Batmobile, an original James Bond Aston Martin, along with a Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and he had an idea that the John Steed Bentley and the Emma Peel Lotus were somewhat valuable as well, especially as they were complete and in good condition, and had the original boxes as well. Maybe there was something else with a bit of value, he thought. He'd better just check. Sweeping his eyes around the room, he noticed a pile of board games. Crossing over to them, he picked them up one by one. He'd just picked up a Spirograph box. Well, fuck all, he muttered, when Daphne walked back into the room. I've put the boxes in the hall for you, she said sadly. And then she saw what he was holding. No, not that one. That was my children's favourite. Oh, no, please, no, don't take that one, she wailed. Arnold smiled inwardly. This was his chance for revenge for that look. I'm sorry. I'm afraid I shall have to take this as well, he told her. For an instant, it looked as if Daphne was going to attack him, and Arnold took a step back and raised his hands defensively. But then Daphne's shoulders slumped, and she said, Then take it and leave, damn you. She stared hard at him for a second. And remember this, she told him. Evil comes to he who does evil. And then she turned and walked out of the room and headed towards the kitchen. Arnold had a vision of large cook knives and decided that he'd better collect his spoils and leave quite quickly. Tossing the Spirograph onto the pile, he went to the van and took out some large cardboard boxes. These he took into the house and filled with the toys and the few other pieces that he'd decided to take. Then he loaded them onto the van. From inside the house he could hear Daphne sobbing her heart out. He was, of course, totally unmoved by her distress. Serves the hideous old cow right for looking at me like that, was his only thought as he drove off. Arriving back at his own home, Arnold backed his van up to the garage, got out, unlocked and opened the garage door. Then he turned back to the van, opened its doors and started to pile the boxes onto the garage floor. It didn't take him long, and he closed the doors with a feeling of satisfaction. Quickly he locked the van up and turned to walk up the short path to his front door. That was when he noticed the Spirograph box. It was lying a couple of inches from up the path. That's strange, he thought. I'm sure I put that in one of the boxes. He bent down and picked it up, intending to put it with the other stuff, and then thought, I can't be asked to do it now. I'll do it in the morning. Once inside, he went to his sitting room and placed the box on his coffee table, so I don't miss it in the morning, he thought. And then he went and made himself a cup of tea, which he took back into the sitting room. Then he lit a cigarette and settled himself comfortably on his sofa and congratulated himself on his haul. Once he'd finished his tea and his smoke, Arnold stood up. I think I'll go down to the pub tonight to celebrate. There's bound to be someone in there who owes me money who'll buy me a few drinks, just to stay on my good side. He grinned at the thought. I'll just have something to eat first, and then have a shower. Got to keep up appearances after all. Arnold prided himself on always looking smart. He had a special going-out suit made in Savile Row that he'd swindled from a wealthy widow after her husband had died by claiming to be from a charity and asking her if she had any old clothes she'd like to donate. He'd intended selling the clothes, probably on eBay. But then he discovered the suit, as well as some of the very nice and expensive-looking shirts fitted him, and decided to keep them. He decided to have his favourite meal, an omelette. Omelettes were cheap to make and didn't use much electricity to cook. I think I'll use 2 eggs tonight, he thought. Just this once. It is a celebration after all. And I think I'll add a bit of ham to it. Oh, maybe a bit of cheese. Heading towards his kitchen, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Perhaps I won't add the cheese, he muttered. No point in going overboard after all. So saying, he carried on to his kitchen. As soon as he'd finished his meal, Arnold got up and went to his bathroom. Turning the shower on, he quickly got undressed and stepped under the warm jets of water. Arnold always had warm showers. Hot showers cost too much money in his opinion, and you didn't get any cleaner. He was in the middle of his ablutions when he heard a noise coming from his sitting room. For a couple of seconds he couldn't work out what the sound was, and then he realised it was the sound of children laughing. Some little bastard's gotten in here somewhere, he thought angrily. I don't know how they do it, but I'll make them wish they hadn't. Turning off the water, Arnold stepped out of his shower and grabbed his dressing gown, tying it loosely in his haste. He rushed towards the sitting room, shouting, "Just you fucking wait till I get there, you little sods! I'll give you what for!" Bursting into the sitting room, he was surprised to see that there was no children to be seen. The sound of their laughter had stopped as well, but they had definitely been in here. He could see that the spirograph had not only been removed from its box, but they'd been playing with it. The bloody cheek of them, he thought. There was also a large sheet of paper on the coffee table with the funny little toothed wheels that the game used still attached, and some kind of design had been drawn onto it. Arnold peered at it. It certainly was an odd-looking thing. It was made up of many intersecting circles and curving lines, and there were many other strange, almost symbol-like swirls both inside and outside of it. Looking at it sent a shiver up Arnold's spine. It seemed almost unnatural, like something a mind not of this world had drawn. Then Arnold noticed that the lines in the centre had crossed each other so many times it looked like they'd gone through the paper and left a small hole. I bet they marked the bloody table as well. Little shits, Arnold thought, growing even more angry. I'd better have a look. Bending over the table, intending to lift the piece of paper so he could see what damage had been done, Arnold suddenly lurched down forwards as his still wet feet slipped on the wooden parquet flooring that he'd put down in most of his rooms. Well, carpets were cheaper, but they had to be cleaned with a vacuum cleaner, and those were expensive, not only to buy, but they also cost a lot of money to run. A wooden floor could be kept clean with a soft broom and an occasional wipe down with a damp cloth. Besides, carpets could wear out, wood lasted a lot longer. Yelling in surprise, Arnold fell across the table, his dressing gown flapping open as he did so. Arnold gave a grunt of pain as his hips and groin impacted, somewhat painfully, with both the design and the wheels. With a slight groan, Arnold grasped the edge of the table with both hands and started to carefully push himself up, remembering the pins had been used to hold the wheels down, and he didn't want there to be any accidents that might involve those. He had just managed to slowly raise his upper body when he realised with a shock that he couldn't lift his hips. What the fuck? He thought, and tried to raise his hips again. They wouldn't budge. Then he noticed a feeling of suction pulling down on his groin, and it seemed to be getting stronger. In a rising panic, he tried once again to lift his hips from the table. That was when the pain started. Slowly at first, but rising rapidly. His penis started to feel a bit sore. This changed quickly to first pain and then agony. It felt like something was chewing on his manhood, and with a terrified scream and almost superhuman strength, Arnold pushed hard on the table edge, thrust himself upwards with his hip. With an agonising pain shooting through his groin, Arnold jerked upright. He was free. Gingerly, Arnold felt his crotch. Something didn't feel right. He looked down and saw with horror what had happened. His foreskin had been almost completely ripped off. There was only a small fragment of it left around the tip of his penis. But the worst thing was, his penis had grooves cut into it. Grooves that went all the way round its circumference, and not only that, it was only attached to him by a tiny strip of flesh about the size of a piece of cotton. As he looked, the skin gave way, and his penis fell onto the floor with a light slap and rolled under the table. As he looked, Arnold noticed that strangely he wasn't bleeding. It was as if the terrible wound had been cauterized in some fashion. This was little consolation, though, and Arnold gave a piteous groan and turned, intending to get his phone from the bedroom and call an ambulance. It was then that he realised that the suction coming from the table had noticeably grown in strength. Not only that, it was getting stronger. Fearfully, Arnold twisted around and saw that a large hole had appeared in the table where the design had been, and the hole was getting wider with every second. He also noticed that his penis was still under the table, rapidly vibrating as the suction tried to pull it in every direction at once. Giving a scream of terror, Arnold turned his back to the door and started to run. But despite his best efforts, the suction pulled him steadily backwards towards the ever-growing hole, pulling his loosely tied dressing gown from his body. Desperately, Arnold flung his hands out and grabbed the door frame in front of him. He felt his legs rise up until he was parallel to the floor. Still the suction rose in strength. It was then he noticed the broom he'd used to sweep the floor leaning against the wall. It was close to him, and a sudden idea flashed into his head. He grabbed the broom and rammed its handle between his buttocks and up into his rectum. To his surprise, he felt a twinge of pleasure as he did so. That should stop me being sucked in, he thought. I'll be too long for it. Sadly for Arnold, his plan did not work. The suction grew ever greater in strength and he lost his grip. This time, though he didn't land flat on the table, he felt something grab hold of him and turn him until he was suspended vertically over the ever-widening hole, and then with a despairing scream, he was pulled rapidly down into the dark depths. 10 seconds later, the remains of the broom shot out of the hole in a spray of bristles and sliced pieces of wood, some of which had an unpleasant-looking brown stain on them. In a way, that made it look as if something hadn't liked the taste of them and had spat them out. One last scream of terror from Arnold followed them, and then there was silence. Hearing Arnold's screams, his neighbours rushed outside to see what was happening. Quickly realising that they were coming from Arnold's house, they rushed over to his house, and as they did so, the screaming stopped. Reaching the front door, they rang the doorbell. There was no reply, so they rang it again. Their house remained silent. They quickly checked the back door, but that too was locked, and there was no answer to their knocking. They briefly discussed breaking a window to gain access, but decided against it. Arnold would probably sue them for the damage. So instead, one of them phoned the police, telling the operator what had happened. "It sounded like he was being murdered," she said, dramatically. This was somewhat ruined by another of his neighbours saying, just loud enough to be heard over the phone, "Bloody hope so, the bastard." PC Michael Maker was in the local park and was in the process of arresting a jogger who he'd caught having a shit behind some bushes when his radio crackled. He told the hapless jogger to wait while he answered and pull your fucking trackies up for God's sake. On being told to go and see what was happening at Arnold's address, he decided to let the jogger off with a quick bollocking. Being first on the scene of a possible GBH, or maybe even a murder, would do his career a lot more good than bringing in some bastard for having a crap in a public place. Having delivered said bollocking, and watched with great amusement as the jogger running off whilst trying not to move his clenched arse cheeks, PC Macker came to Arnold's address. Upon reaching his destination, he told the large group of neighbours to stand back. "This is now police business," he told them. "I shall deal with this." So saying so, he walked up to the door and rang the bell. "We've already tried that, you idiot," said a voice behind him. Swiftly he turned round to see who had made the disrespectful comment. But there was just innocent-looking faces looking back at him. "I suppose you've checked the back door as well?" he asked, somewhat grumpily, receiving the answer of course." He thought for a few seconds. "Well, then I'll have to break a window and get in that way. Can one of you fetch me a towel? I want to wrap my hand in it so as not to get it cut." A neighbour from the house next door obliged, and he wrapped it around his hand and forearm, and then drew his baton. It took a couple of hard swings to shatter the window, and then he used the baton to remove as many shards of glass from the frame as he could, and then he climbed through into Arnold's sitting room. After a quick glance around and seeing, to his disappointment, the room contained no body, he pulled on a pair of latex gloves and proceeded to quickly look around the rest of the house, still finding no sign of any crime being committed. He made his way back to the sitting room and then started to look round more closely. There were brush bristles and bits of wood lying all over the floor, which was strange, and the coffee table had a piece of paper lying on it. The piece of paper was blank, but it had a large hole in its centre that looked like the inner serrated edge had been exposed to something hot, being a dark brown colour. "It's weird," he thought. "The table doesn't look scorched at all. Maybe something underneath has caused the burning. I'll take a look." He lifted up one edge of the table and scrutinised it. The underneath was unmarked. Then he noticed something lying on the floor by his feet. "Hello," he thought. "Someone's a messy eater." Then he looked at the object more closely. His face went white, and bile rose in his throat. Making gagging noises, he ran to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped outside. "Everybody keep back," he told the waiting neighbours with some difficulty. "Now this is a crime scene." In the distance he could hear the sound of an approaching police car siren. "That'll be Bert and Harry. They'll love putting on the blues and twos," he thought. "Thank fuck for that, I can let them deal with this now." And then he threw up all over the garden path. Arnold woke up in almost total darkness. All he could see were small translucent slivers of something floating nearby. There seemed to be a lot of them. Ignoring them for a moment, he reached down experimentally, hoping that what he feared hadn't happened. With a sick feeling, he realised that his penis was indeed gone. Then he remembered the feet slipping on the parquet floor, and it occurred to him that perhaps he'd fallen over in his sitting room, hit his head. Maybe this was just a horrible dream whilst he was unconscious. Then again, did you dream when you were knocked down? He didn't know, but he thought it might be possible. And then his attention was captured by a flicker of movement. The translucent slivers were moving towards him, and there was a lot of them, a hell of a lot. Hundreds, in fact. What were they? And why were they moving towards him? Arnold didn't know, but he had a terrible feeling he wasn't going to like it when he found out. As they got closer, he realised that they were flat discs, very like the spirograph ones he'd seen on the coffee table. No, he was wrong. They were spirograph discs, but these didn't seem to be made out of plastic. Their material looked more like glass. Slowly the discs moved closer. He twisted round and saw with horror that the discs were all around him. Closer and closer came the discs, until they were inches from his body. Then they began to spin and move towards him at once. Arnold screamed in pain as the discs made contact with his body and their teeth bit into his body. Now the discs moved forward more slowly, and Arnold could see minuscule pieces of his flesh spurting out and then forming a red cloud that slowly floated away into the surrounding darkness. Then he saw no more as the discs bit into his eyes, and with a whining sound bit into his skull. For what seemed like forever, Arnold was held in this place as the discs did their work, and then at last the discs finally cut their way through his skull and into his brain, and he felt no more. Desk Sergeant Osbert Lesby. Osbert had been put on desk duty for being a bit too enthusiastic with his baton and/or taser when arresting unresisting suspects, to such an extent that if anyone complained of rough treatment, they'd be told, "That's nothing. You should just be glad it isn't Sergeant Lesby, haven't you? You'd know all about that." He was on his way to the canteen for his lunch when he saw DC Hadifew walking towards him with a look of consternation on her face. "There you are, Sarge," she said. "There's a problem with PC Macca. There's something wrong with him. I found him outside, sitting against the wall crying. I've put him in one of the interview rooms. I'll show you." Following her as she led the way, Osbert wondered what on earth could be wrong with PC Macca. The lad was normally so solid as a rock. On entering the room, Osbert was shocked to find that PC Macca sat with his elbows resting on the table, with an untouched cup of tea in front of him, and his face buried in his hands, sobbing softly. Making his way to the table, Osbert sat down in front of the distraught constable and asked gently, "What is it, lad? What's happened to cause all this?" PC Macca raised his face from his hand and looked at the sergeant, a look of revulsion mixed with dismay on his face. "I saw it, Sarge," he blurted. I was the first one to see it, and at first I thought it was a piece of hot dog some messy eater had dropped on the floor. And some mice had nibbled at it. But it wasn't, Sarge, it wasn't. It was a cock. A crinkle-cut cock!" Then he covered his face with his hands once again as Osbert sat aghast, trying to ignore the vision forming in his mind, and he heard the softly spoken words, "I'll never eat a hot dog again." Arnold woke up. He had no idea how many times he'd gone through this agony of having his body slowly being diced apart by these small, whirling teeth, but it must have been at least a dozen. "I must have died and gone to hell," he muttered, as he watched the discs form up once again. Then he heard a voice in his head. It was a soft voice that somehow managed to sound a bit plasticky. "No," said the voice, "you're not dead. In fact, even if you wished it to be so, you will never be allowed to die. And no, you are not in hell. You're in our realm, and here you will stay as our plaything." Arnold then realized that it was to be his fate to be slowly diced apart, again and again and again for all eternity, and he gave a scream of utter despair once more as the discs started spinning and closing in around him. Epilogue. Daphne Ellis opened her front door the next morning, intending to go to the local shop to buy some milk. As she stepped outside, she noticed something lying on the path in front of her. With a small shock, she realized it was the spirograph box that Arnold had taken from her the day before. Well, well, she thought. Mr. Finch knew how much it meant to me, and had had second thoughts about keeping it. Maybe I misjudged him. Perhaps he isn't so bad after all. Then she picked up the box and carried it inside up to the children's bedroom, where she placed it on top of the pile of board games. "There," she said, "back in its proper place." Then she went downstairs, left the house, and went to buy her milk. Meanwhile, in another place, first star on the left, carry on till midnight, Arnold Finch kept screaming, screaming, and screaming. Forever. The end.
Two Stamps Beyond by Z0Z7. Denise Crawford looked up at her husband and said, "Go on, Terry, you have a go, I'll pay. She's very good." Terry looked down at the fortune teller, scepticism written across his face. Still, he'd had a good day so far, having had a couple of drinks in the pub before he and Denise had come to the local fete. Then he'd managed to pick up a couple of bottles of craft beers and had frightened the old fool in front of him in the queue from buying the last bottle of farmhouse cider. "Okay," he replied. "Why not? It should be good for a laugh." He knew what sort of thing she'd tell him anyway. It would be similar to the load of crap she'd told Denise, he was sure. There'd be something about suffering a loss, followed by happiness. What a load of bollocks. He'd rip her stupid predictions apart, and it would serve her right. He hadn't liked the way the daft cad noticed Denise's swollen eye and looked at him suspiciously before asking if she was okay. Denise had, as usual, said she was fine. She had just hit herself with the handle of the vacuum cleaner when she'd bent down to remove a bit of tissue that had blocked the thing up. The fortune teller hadn't looked like she'd believed her. Denise stood up and Terry took her place at the table. Madame Esmeralda handed Terry a pack of cards and asked him to shuffle them, think of a question he wanted answered, then hand them back to her with their faces downwards whilst keeping his question in his mind. Terry did so. Madame Esmeralda stared at them for a second, looking confused, but then started to lay them out in a pattern she preferred to use. One by one she laid them out, saying nothing, her face slowly going pale. Once they were laid out, she stared at them for 30 seconds, and then forcing a smile, she started talking, telling him he'd have a long life and receive everything he deserved. Then she gathered the cards back up and told them she was going to take a break and thanked them for visiting her stall. "It's been an interesting experience," she told them, quickly stuffing the cards into her bag and hurrying away. Terry stood up feeling a bit disgruntled. "Oh, fuck me, that wasn't great, was it?" The bloody witch only looked at those stupid cards for 30 seconds, then ran off. "Perhaps she had a sudden need for the loo," Denise suggested. "She was diddling us, that's what she was doing," Terry snapped. "Why are you defending her?" Denise took a step backwards, her eyes fearful. "I'm not defending her, Terry. I just said she might have needed..." Terry took a step forward. "Are you calling me a liar?" he interrupted, his face full of suppressed anger. "No, Terry, I'm not. You're quite right as usual, and I was in the wrong," Denise said desperately. "I shouldn't have said what I did. I'm really sorry, really, really sorry." "Well then," Terry said mollified, "we'll let this go this time. But don't you go making me angry again. You know what happens when I get angry." Denise nodded. "Yes, Terry, I know," she said quietly. "I have to be punished when I do something wrong and upset you." "Good. Just make sure you remember that," Terry told her sternly. "Now let's get home. I want my tea." Denise looked fondly at him and said, "Of course, sweetheart. By the way, what was the question you wanted answering? If you don't mind me asking, that is." Terry shrugged. "Oh, that. I just wanted to know how long I'd live." As they walked away, Madame Esmeralda was swallowing brandy from her small flask. like there was no tomorrow. It wasn't until the flask was half empty that she felt steady enough to look at the cards again. Taking them from her bag, she closely looked at them. They'd gone back to normal, thank goodness. The small discs with teeth around them that had shown through both the pictures and the pattern on the back had disappeared. She gave them a quick shuffle just in case, but they remained normal. She shook her head and sighed. "Maybe I imagined it," she muttered. Then she shook her head and shuddered. "No, I didn't imagine it. I saw what I saw, and I wish I hadn't." Then she took a deep breath, took a pack of extra strong mints from her handbag, popped one in her mouth to hide the smell of brandy, and slowly walked back to her stall. Harry Ellis opened the front door and stepped inside, giving his usual call of "I'm home," and headed into the kitchen. His wife Jenny looked up from a magazine and smiled. "Hello, love, do you want a cup of tea?" Harry smiled back at her. "Yes, please," he said. "That would be lovely." He laid a carrier bag he was carrying on the kitchen table and sat down on one of the chairs. "How's your day been today? Work was okay, was it?" he asked. "It was fine, just the same old thing, you know," Jenny replied, her back to him as she put a tea bag into a cup and switched on the kettle. "I picked the kids up, they're in the front room watching telly. And how was your day?" Harry grinned. "The same. Nothing much changes, does it?" Jenny laughed. "No, it doesn't, does it? Same thing every day, just us getting older." Harry laughed. "Now there's a cheerful thought." Jenny gave him a wry grin. "It was true though, isn't it?" Then she noticed a carrier bag. "What have you got in there?" "Ah, I nearly forgot," Harry told her. "I saw this in the charity shop as I was walking to the bus stop. It was only a couple of quid, and I thought the kids might like it." He paused. "Funny thing is, I don't usually look in that shop window, but as soon as I saw it, I had a feeling that I should buy it." His brow creased in thought. "Strange, when you think about it. Still, as I said, it only cost a couple of quid." He opened the bag and pulled out a large flat box. Jenny looked at it and laughed. "One of those? I suppose they might like it. They were quite popular when I was young." She laughed again. "But I'd wait until they've stopped watching that programme with the penguin in it. You know how they enjoy that." "Yes, they certainly do. They even like the one with the monsters they found on YouTube." "Don't mention that," Jenny told him. "I had a nightmare after I saw it. I dreamt I was being chased by a hooting penguin with a flamethrower." "I remember," Harry said with a laugh. "You woke me up trying to run in your sleep." He looked at the box. "Funny thing is, I had one of those when I was 7. I only played with it for one day. I drew a pattern that really gave me the creeps. It looked so strange. That night I had a nightmare that one of my friends was chasing me down the street with a meat cleaver and chopping bits off me." He laughed again. "I threw the thing in the cupboard and never used it again." "I hope that doesn't happen to Lenny and Alice," Jenny said, sounding slightly worried. "Oh, I wouldn't worry about it," he said. "If that penguin didn't scare them, then this thing isn't likely to." Jenny gave a little shiver. "Good point," she replied. As he and Denise neared the car park, Terry was still feeling irritated about how the experience at Madame Esmeralda's stall had gone. He looked around to see if there was someone he could scare to cheer himself up. There wasn't many stalls at this end of the fete, and he was thinking he was out of luck. But then his eyes fell on a stall that had a sign on the end of a long pole, and what looked like a piece of bedsheet nailed to it. Nailed to a cross piece in the imitation of a sail. Written on the sheet were the words, "The Strategic Buccaneer." On the table were 2 piles of blister packs, one containing a child's pirate set containing a plastic pirate hat, an eye patch and a plastic cutlass, and an unrealistic flintlock pistol that shot rubber-tipped darts. And between the piles were several boxes containing toy pirate ships. The man standing behind the table was quite old, overweight, and was wearing a pirate costume and a not very realistic white wig. "He'll do," Terry said to himself. Terry grabbed Denise's arm to bring her to a halt. "Look at that fat old fucker over there," he said loudly enough for the vendor to hear. "Fuck me, that wig he's wearing looks like an old floor mop." The man behind the table said nothing. He just bent down and rummaged around in a large sports bag by his feet. When he straightened up, he had a large metal-headed mallet in his hand. He gently tapped the mallet in his other hand. "Say that again," he said in a menacing tone. "Cunt." This was not at all what Terry was expecting. His face paled, and he felt a shiver of fear run down his spine. The old bastard looked more than ready to use the mallet, and Terry had a sudden and very unpleasant vision of the damage that thing would do to him. So he was actually glad when Denise grabbed his arm and said, "Leave it, Terry, please. He's an old man, he's not worth the trouble." Terry let out a slow breath and, trying not to let his fear make his voice quaver, replied, "Yeah, you're right. Fuck me, I'd probably kill him if I hit him anyway. The old bastard isn't worth it." As he let Denise pull him towards the car park, he went for a last bit of bravado. "But he'd better watch it. Next time I won't let him off. Fuck me if I will." Lenny and Alice were in the back garden, sitting on benches behind the large garden table. A large piece of white paper was laid out, and their new toy was set upon the top of it. Lenny was looking at the pattern they'd been taking it in turns to add, with a frown on his face. The more he looked at it, the less he liked it. It seemed threatening somehow. Where the red and blue lines had crossed each other, they'd made an unpleasant, very dark purple colour, and the pattern itself looked wrong. He couldn't say why it looked wrong exactly, but it did. Indoors, Harry and Jenny were trying to decide what to have for an evening meal when they heard a car draw up next door. "That'll be Terry and Denise," Jenny said shortly. "I hope Terry doesn't kick off again tonight. Did you see Denise's eye yesterday?" "Yes, I did," Harry replied, with a somewhat savage look on his face. "If I hear anything again tonight, I'm going to go round there and sort him out." Jenny reached out and grabbed his wrist. "Harry, don't. You don't know what he'll do." Harry gave a short laugh. Terry's a vicious wanker, but only with people who are smaller and weaker than him. I'm neither. In the back garden, then he gave a start of surprise. He was sure the little discs had twitched, but they couldn't move on their own, could they? Inside the kitchen, Jenny was telling Harry off. "Don't use words like wanker. The kids might hear you. And if you hit Terry, he'll accuse you of assault and call the police." Harry sighed. "Yeah, I suppose you're right," Harry admitted. "It might be worth it, though." And then he brightened up. "Tell you what, why don't we get a takeaway? It'll make a change, and the kids do love a takeaway." Jenny smiled. "And so do you," she thought. "Okay," she said. "Go and call them in, and we'll go now." Then he was still staring at the pattern when he heard his father call him from the open French windows that they were going to get a takeaway. Immediately forgetting about both the pattern and the discs, the children gave a shriek of delight and quickly ran inside to the house, leaving behind them lay the now unattended toy. Several minutes passed. Then there was the sound of the family car moving down the road, and out in the back garden the discs started to move. Denise was feeling worried. On the trip home, Terry had carried on telling her what he'd do to the old man in the pirate costume for a few minutes. Then he lapsed into a brooding silence. Once they'd arrived at their home, he'd headed straight for a full whisky bottle on the sideboard. By now he must have had quite a few drinks, and a drunk Terry was a lot more dangerous than a sober Terry. Still, she'd made him his favourite tea, and that would cheer him up. Putting on her best smile, she carried the 2 full plates into the lounge and placed them on the dining table set to one side of the room. "There you go, sweetheart, I've made you your favourite, double egg and chips," she said, as cheerful as she could. Then she looked at the table and said, "Oh, look at that, silly me, I've forgotten the tomato sauce. I'll just go and get it." Then she turned and headed back to the kitchen. As she went, she heard Terry stand up with a grunt and walk towards the table. She'd just picked up the bottle of tomato sauce when she heard Terry say loudly, "Fuck me, what's this?" With a feeling of dread, Denise hurried back to the lounge to see Terry with an angry look on his face, pointing at one of the plates. "Look what you've done! You've broken one of my eggs." "No, Terry, that's mine. Your plate is the one next to it," Denise said desperately. "I'd never give you a broken egg. I know you don't like them." "No, you did it deliberately," Terry yelled. "Why did you?" His voice trailed off as the thought occurred to him. "Ah, I know. You did it so you could tell them apart. You've poisoned my tea, haven't you? With an angry snarl, he picked up the plate and threw it at the wall. Chips and broken pieces of plate fell to the floor, and 2 fried eggs slowly slid downwards, leaving a sticky orange trail behind them. Now thoroughly alarmed, but not trying to show it, Denise took a step backwards. Of course I haven't poisoned you, Terry. You know I'd never do a thing like that. Liar! Terry bellowed and lunged forward, wrapping his left hand around her throat. You're trying to murder me. Moving quickly, he forced Denise backwards and slammed her against the door frame. Denise gave a grunt as her back and head hit the wood, and she sagged slightly. I'll teach you, Terry yelled, and his right hand, balled into a fist, slammed into her stomach. Denise gave an even louder grunt and fell to the floor. As she knelt there, with her hands held to her stomach, Terry grabbed her by the hair and lifted her head up. He then slapped her hard across the face twice and started to pull her up. To Denise it felt like her scalp was being torn off, and she struggled to get to her feet, and with one hand still clasping her stomach, she reached up and grasped Terry's wrist, trying to lift herself up and take off some of the pressure on her scalp. How dare you touch me, you murdering bitch! Let go of me now! Terry shouted in a rage, and still holding her, he started to pull her along the floor. Denise's struggling became more frantic as she tried to use her legs to push herself along, and forgetting about her stomach, she used both her hands to grasp Terry's wrist. I said fucking let go! Terry yelled and stamped down hard on her ribs twice. The second stamp had the desired effect. Denise felt something give and a sharp pain lanced through her side. She gave a short shriek of pain and her hands fell away from Terry's wrist and went to her side. Terry dragged her along for another couple of feet and let go of her hair. Right, he said in a satisfied tone. That'll learn you. You won't try and poison me again. He looked round and saw Denise's handbag on the sofa. Walking over to it, he picked it up and rummaged inside it until he found her purse. Then he dropped the bag to the floor. Taking the 5 £10 notes he'd found in the purse, he stuffed them into his pocket of his jeans and threw the purse across the room. Then he turned to look at Denise. She was still lying on the floor, curled up with her hands holding her side, and taking short, quick breaths. Terry laughed and said, I'm going to the pub and I'll have my tea there, and you're paying. Then he pointed to the broken plate and the remains of the egg and chips lying on the floor. And you'd better have that lot cleaned up by the time I get home. So get up and get it done. Denise groaned and then coughed and tasted blood. I can't, Terry, she said between gasps. I think you've really hurt me this time. Bollocks I have, Terry told her. If it isn't clean by the time I get home, you'll know what hurt's all about. He then turned away from her and headed to the back door, muttering to himself about what he'd do to her if she hadn't cleaned the place up. Leaving the house, he went to the back gate, opened it and stepped into the narrow path that ran along the back of the houses with the local park on the opposite side. All he had to do was squeeze through the hole in the fence a short way down the path, cross the park, and he'd be at the pub in 10 minutes. When he turned back to face the house, Remember, if you haven't done as I told... He thought for a few seconds before continuing, I'll rip your fucking guts out. Fuck me, yes, I'll rip 'em right out. He turned and took a step along the path. Suddenly he heard a noise. It was the sound of children chanting, Terry's a vicious wanker, Terry's a vicious wanker, over and over again. And it was coming from that bastard Harry's garden. Normally, Terry was rather frightened of Harry and tried to avoid him as much as possible. So if he'd not been so full of alcohol and adrenaline, he would have never have done what he was about to do. He rushed to Harry's back gate and tried to open it, but it was locked. Full of rage, he kicked it open and strode into the garden. Shut it, you little shits, or I'll... But then his voice trailed off as he realised that the chanting had stopped. The garden was empty. Back in her lounge, Denise began to slowly and agonisingly drag herself across the floor towards her handbag and her phone. She heard Terry's angry yells and knew he wasn't going to come back and help her. This was the final straw. She had put up with his bullying and violence, but leaving her to lie there badly injured was too much. Terry was disappointed. The children were nowhere in sight. Fuck me, they're quick on their feet, little bastards, he muttered to himself. They must be indoors, the little fuckers. Probably with the doors locked and shitting themselves. Then a thought struck him. Harry hadn't come outside to see what all the noise was about. He and Jenny must have gone out and left the children at home. It never occurred to him that no normal parent would leave 6 and 8-year-old children unattended. To him it seemed a perfectly reasonable thing to do. For a few seconds he thought of breaking his way into the house and finding them, but then decided he wanted a drink more than the pleasure of giving them a hiding. Then something caught his attention, something that reflected the late afternoon light. Inexplicably this intrigued him, and he walked across the lawn to look at it. "Ah, bollocks," he exclaimed as he looked down at the spirograph. "It's just a kid's toy." Then a thought occurred to him and he grinned. He'd teach the little sods a lesson. He'd fuck their little shitty toy up. Grabbing the paper, he jerked it savagely off the table, sending it flying through the air to land on the grass. To his surprise, the spirograph remained pinned to the paper in the exact same position as it was when it had been on the table. They must have pinned that down bloody tight, he thought. Well, it'll just make it easier to smash to pieces. Smiling wickedly, he stepped on the spirograph and brought his foot down on it hard. All this did was enlarge the small hole he hadn't noticed in the centre of the pattern. Seeing the discs undamaged, he brought his foot down again, even harder. Seeing that there still appeared to be no damage to the discs, he lifted his foot once more, or at least tried to. For some reason his foot wouldn't move. As he stared down in amazement, he felt a sudden pull on his foot. What the fuck, he thought. Then the pull grew stronger, and his foot began to sink. Not into the ground, he suddenly realised, but into the pattern that was drawn on the paper. Somehow the pattern had grown in size, and was now slightly larger than his foot, and was growing larger. And as the hole grew larger, so the pull on his foot grew stronger. Now suddenly sober, and thoroughly frightened, Terry tried desperately to break free. But all his struggles were to no avail, and soon his ankle slowly dipped below the surface. Then the pain started. It felt like hundreds of tiny teeth were ripping into his flesh. Terry started to scream. The whole street heard his screams, and most of them rushed out to find where the screaming was coming from. Upon finding it was coming from Harry and Jenny's back garden, they decided that Harry has finally given Terry the thrashing he so richly deserved. Then they smiled at each other and went back indoors. Visions of undead zombies devouring his flesh flashed into Terry's mind, and he quickly pulled off his other trainer and flailed madly at the hole, trying to hit what it was that was tearing into his leg. He had no effect, however, and the leg sank even deeper into the now rapidly widening hole. Soon his other foot was being dragged downwards, and Terry felt small teeth bite into his leg too. Frantically, he flailed even more dementedly with his trainer. But the pulling just increased. Soon he'd sunk down to his upper thighs, and giving up on the trainer, he flung it away and threw his upper body flat on the ground, grabbing hold of grass in a vain attempt to stop himself sinking even lower into the hole. It didn't work. The grass just tore out at its roots, and with ever increasing speed, Terry was drawn down into the darkness, still clutching a few pieces of grass with his fingers, his final scream of terror and pain echoing up and down the street. Terry came awake and opened his eyes. A bright white light made him close them immediately. He tried to cover his face with his hands, but his arms wouldn't move. Then he tried to turn his back on the light, but his legs wouldn't move either. In fact, he realised he couldn't move anything below his neck. "Fuck me, turn that sodding light down, you bastards," he yelled. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once said, "Very well, if you can't see, we shall do so. We wouldn't want you to miss anything." Terry didn't like the sound of that voice. It didn't sound human, and had a strange, almost mechanical sound to it. The light did dim a bit, though. Terry opened his eyes cautiously. He blinked a couple of times, and things sprang into focus. 4 feet in front of him was a spiky-looking pillar, about 4 foot taller than himself. He looked down and saw he was standing on what appeared to be a very large plastic hoop with teeth around its circumference, which were meshed into the teeth of 4 evenly spaced sprocket-like discs. "Fuck me, this is a strange place," Terry said. Then an idea came to him. "I get it, I fell, knocked myself out and injured my back. That's why you won't let me move, isn't it?" A strange voice replied with just one word. "No." Terry tried to see where the voice was coming from, but beyond the discs there was only an inky blackness. Suddenly, Terry saw a strange object appear from the darkness and headed slowly towards him. As far as he could make out, it was made up of 6 of those sprocket-shaped discs in a spherical shape. What the fuck is that, he wondered. The object moved closer to him, and when it was about 2 feet away it began to spin. Suddenly it rushed forward, hitting him in the stomach. Then its teeth began ripping into his flesh. Terry screamed at the sudden agony, and carried on screaming as it burrowed its way inwards. Once inside him, it stopped spinning and started moving in what seemed to be random directions. The agony tore through Terry's body, and he was about to faint when the voice spoke again. "No," it said. "I won't allow that," and Terry felt something like, but not quite, an electric shock inside his head. It hurts, fuck me, stop it, oh fuck me," he said in a half yell and half scream. The thing inside him moved for another couple of seconds, then stopped. Then it shot out of his stomach through a hole it had created. Terry screamed again. Then, still screaming, he looked down at the thing which had caused him so much pain. It was moving towards the pillar, dragging something behind it. It was a long pink tube-like thing that glistened wetly in the light. Terry couldn't think what it was for a second, but then the truth dawned on him. And the horror of what was happening, making him forget the pain. "It's pulling my guts out," he shrieked. "Ah, fuck me, it's pulling my guts out." Moving slowly, the spherical shape finally reached the pillar, and with infinite care began to circle it, wrapping Terry's intestines around it. The pain was so great that Terry's screams became even louder. Then the hoop he was standing on began to move, and Terry found himself slowly circling the pillar. More of his intestines were pulled out slowly, and were wrapped around the pillar, its spikes digging into the gleaming tubes, and causing large gashes to open in them. The smell of excrement filled Terry's nostrils, and the pillar was slowly covered in pieces of tattered flesh and sticky brown liquid. The agony Terry felt was indescribable, and his screams took on a strange, undulating quality as they echoed into the darkness. More and more of Terry's intestines were slowly pulled from his body and wrapped around the pillar until it looked as if it was covered by a big, glistening, rubbery-looking, fleshy sheath. Suddenly Terry felt a pulling low down on his body, followed by a terrible pressure on his rectum. Then something inside him seemed to burst. Terry felt a terrible pain in his chest, as his heart first gave a stutter, then stopped. Terry gave a scream of torment, and then his mind spat down into darkness. The police were the first to arrive at Denise's house, and finding that ringing the doorbell brought a weak call of help from inside, promptly broke the door down. They found Denise still lying on the floor, taking short gasps of breath, with blood running from her mouth. 30 seconds later, the ambulance had arrived, and it wasn't long before Denise was on her way to the local hospital's casualty department, and from there quickly sent to the ICU ward. 3 of her ribs had been fractured, and one of the broken ends had pierced her lung, which was filled with blood. The police, of course, had put out an arrest warrant for Terry, together with a "if you see this man, do not approach. He is considered dangerous" notice in the media. This would have pleased Terry if he'd have seen it, but he never would, of course. Besides, he had other things to think about. But no sign of him would ever be found. When Harry and his family returned home, Harry and Jenny were only half surprised to see the police and an ambulance outside Denise's house. "I knew this would happen one day," Harry said sadly. It was only a matter of time. The next morning, when Harry went to the back garden for his first smoke of the day, he noticed that the gate had been kicked in and the spirograph had gone. All that remained was a sheet of paper with a large burned hole in the middle of it. Typical, Harry thought. Some sods had kicked in the gate and pinched the kid's toy. They even burned out the pattern they'd drawn, bastards. Then he noticed a trainer lying nearby on the grass, and someone's thrown an old shoe over the fence as well. He sighed. What a world we live in. He then picked up the trainer, went out the back gate and threw the trainer over the fence and into the park. Terry awoke once again. He'd lost count of how many times his intestines had been slowly pulled out from him, but it seemed like hundreds. Seeing the spherical object approaching him once more, he groaned. "Not again, please, not again," he pleaded. "Ah, fuck me, fuck me." Then the strange voice spoke. "We do not do requests, so stop asking," it said, sounding irritated. But then its tone sounded thoughtful. "It does sound interesting, though. Perhaps we could." It stopped for a moment and then said loudly, "What?" Terry could just about make a high-pitched whispering sound. Then the voice said, "Really? Is it? How strange. I'd never have guessed that. Well, well, they are bizarre creatures, aren't they?" Then it spoke to Terry again. "I have been informed in this case, 'fuck me' is an exclamation, not a request. Is that correct?" Terry in his agony was unsure what was going on and merely nodded. "Good then," the voice said. "You can learn something new every day, it seems. Well, now that is sorted out, let us continue." Once more the spherical object shot forward and gouged its way through Terry's flesh, and he started to scream once again. This time, though, his screams included a tone of utter despair, as he finally realised that his torture would never end. Not ever. Epilogue. Denise made a full recovery from her physical injuries, but developed a phobia of men whose names started with the letter T. She sold her house and moved away from the area and its horrible memories. The police had questioned all of the neighbours, but they all claimed that they'd neither seen nor heard anything out of the ordinary. They found out that it wasn't Harry who'd seen to Terry, but that didn't matter to them. As far as they was concerned, whoever had dealt with Terry was a hero in their eyes, and so after all, life in the street returned to normal. A normal without Terry, of course. 1 year later. Professor Warren Clark, lecturer of parapsychology and paranormal investigator, walked up the short garden path at the front of the 3-bedroom house and rang the doorbell. A tall, well-built man opened the door and said yes. "Mr. Ellis?" Warren asked, getting a reply of, "Yes, that's me. What do you want?" He smiled. "Well, Mr. Ellis, I'd like to ask you some questions about the day Terry Crawford disappeared." The end. Hello and welcome to the Spiro Hunting and Intel headquarters. You don't need to know my name, but I'll be reading Zed Not Z's brand new book. Human names can be tricky. So you'll see myself reading the first part, and later on DC Hadafew from her very opulent office reading part 2. So I think I'll just get straight down to it, and you will learn the story of Jimmy the Gimp. From me anyway. You'll have to get the rest from DC Hadafew. Human Names Can Be Tricky by Zed Not Z. Part 1. Jimmy the Gimp. James Patterson, known to everyone in the neighbourhood as Jimmy the Gimp, rang the doorbell to number 18 Spanker Road and smiled happily, thinking of the long thin brown package he'd put in his rather large backpack together with his schoolgirl uniform. Unfortunately, his rubber suit had split after many years of use while he was receiving his punishment from Winifred Pierce, otherwise known as Winnie the Whip. Jimmy had been bent over touching his toes, and the suit had been stretched as tight as a drum and was showing signs of strain. This, together with the mighty whack from Winnie's riding crop and an almighty surprise fart from Jimmy, had caused the somewhat ancient suit to suddenly give way. The resultant split reached all the way up his back. Jimmy had nearly cried, but a shriek of "You filthy bastard!" and an extra hard blow from the riding crop. Winnie had been taking a deep breath at that precise moment and had inhaled some of the fart. She had of course been less than pleased. She even claimed that she could taste it in her mouth. Had made him felt slightly better. He had of course ordered another suit online, but it had yet to arrive. The "how dare you wear my daughter's uniform, you must be punished" game they played was always good, but he'd missed his suit nonetheless. The door opening, he was greeted by Winnie's smiling face. "Hello, Jimmy," she said, stepping back. "Come on in. Kettle's about to boil, so it won't take a minute. Oh, and I've got to nip out to the supermarket before we start. I was going to do our favourite bacon and mushroom sandwiches for our supper, but the Marquis got at the bacon while I was answering the phone, so I have to go and get another pack." The Marquis, full name the Marquis de Sade, was Winifred's Irish wolfhound. Well, that sort of thing's bound to happen if you own a dog that size. They can reach almost anywhere, Jimmy told her. "He's a good boy really, it was partly my fault anyway," Winnie replied. "I really should have put it in the fridge before answering the phone. He's in the back garden now, having a staring competition with a squirrel, which he'll most likely win," Jimmy said with a grin. "Most likely, yes," Winnie replied. "Now go and sit down and I'll get you that tea." Jimmy walked to the sitting room. He noticed something lying on the dining table. Looking more closely, he saw it was a spirograph. Winnie had obviously been trying it out, as there was a pattern already drawn on a piece of paper. Jimmy gave an amused little shake of his head. Winnie and her board games, he thought. She always liked one after supper, although he wasn't that all into board games. Jimmy had to admit they could be fun, but not that last one though. That was, in his opinion, thoroughly unpleasant. Pulling body parts out of someone while they were still awake was more like something an evil person would do to a captive than a fun game as far as he was concerned. In fact, he'd been quite surprised it was allowed to be sold to adults, much less children it was aimed at. It was almost like someone wanted to train children to be evil. The thing on the table looked innocent enough though. Mind you, he thought, you wouldn't want to get your cock caught in there. It'd probably end up looking like a crinkle cut chip or something. A vision of having to go to casualty department at the local hospital with the toy surgically removed came to his mind. The pain he could put up with, and probably enjoy, to be honest. But the embarrassment would be awful. Still, he wasn't about to dangle anything over or in the thing, so he would have no chance of that happening. Then he gave a short laugh and turned away. Sometimes his imagination could turn towards strange ideas. A crinkle-cut cock indeed. Whatever next. Jimmy sat down in a large comfortable armchair he favoured and took the latest copy of Pleasure Through Pain from his backpack. He just started reading an article on the proper way to use thumb screws without causing permanent damage when Winnie came into the room with his tea. Thanking her, Jimmy took the tea and had a sip. "I see you've got a different game for us after supper," he said, smiling. "It was obvious you didn't like the last one," Winnie replied. "And when I saw this one, I thought it might be fun and a bit different. We can take it in turns using it, see what patterns we can come up with." "I see you've already been having a bit of practice with it," Jimmy said with a grin. "I wanted to check how it worked before we started it after supper," Winnie replied. "If you fancy giving it a quick go as well, feel free. You can finish off the pattern I started if you want." "I might do that in a bit," Jimmy told her. "And I'll try not to ruin what you've done already." Winnie glanced at the pattern she'd started and gave a short laugh. "I don't think it can be ruined," she told him. "It's a bit odd looking. Anyway, I must be off. I'll see you in a little while." Jimmy heard the sound of Winnie's car heading off and took another sip of tea. Good old Winnie, he thought. It's just like her to worry about supper. He and Winnie had been friends for years and were very fond of each other, and once a week Jimmy would go to her house to receive his proper punishment. Winnie had given up the dominatrix business before she moved to their town, having made enough money from the wealthy, and in more than a few cases influential, clientele. to live comfortably without having to worry about bills. She did, however, spend 1 week a month visiting her old clients for old time's sake. And although she didn't charge them, they liked to give her a tip after each session. These tips were usually very generous, which gave Winnie a little extra income. And of course, she didn't charge Jimmy either. He had to admit he had missed his sessions with her while she was away, but it was only once a month, so he couldn't really complain. Once he finished his tea, Jimmy opened his backpack and first took out the long package, then the costume for the evening. Standing up, he changed into the schoolgirl uniform. He got the idea of it wearing it from a music video he'd seen. The American singer had been wearing one. He couldn't quite remember her name. He thought it was something like Normandy Javelins. Although because it was a pretty warm evening, he decided to leave the blazer off until later. Then he dipped into the backpack once more and removed the new addition he'd bought. It was a blonde wig with pigtails. This will give Winnie a laugh, he thought, and I'm sure she'll think of a new reason to punish me for wearing it. He had a vision of an outraged Winnie saying something like, "You're wearing my wig as well? That truly is naughty. You deserve a harsh punishment for that." And Jimmy had bought just the thing to be used in such a punishment. Setting the wig on his head, he picked up the brown paper package and opened it. Inside was a leather cat-o'-nine-tails. Just the job, he thought, gleefully, and ran the long strips of leather through his fingers, imagining Winnie wielding it with a will. The thought excited him, and he thought, "No, I mustn't think of it now. I must wait till Winnie gets back. I'll have a go at the spirograph. That should calm me down." Quickly moving to the table, he placed a cat-o'-nine-tails on it, and then sat down looking at the pattern Winnie had started. He had to admit Winnie was right. It did look a bit odd, but you could do better ones with a bit of practice. Perhaps if you finished this one off, he'd work out how to make the best patterns. Pulling out a chair, Jimmy sat down and looked more closely at the pattern. Perhaps a bit more blue would make it better, he thought. And picking up the blue pen, set to work. It didn't take long before he realised the blue wasn't working. If anything, the pattern looked even odder than before. Maybe red would be better. It's worth a try at least, he thought. But that didn't work either. All it did was mix with the blue to produce a nasty looking purple. So he tried adding more green. Unfortunately, after a couple of goes, the only difference it really made was to put quite a large hole in the centre of the pattern where the lines crossed. "Bugger," Jimmy said, getting annoyed. He was glad that Winnie had put a cork mat under the paper though, otherwise the table could have been marked. Bloody thing's ruined. Right, I'll try again. I'm not having a kids game beat me. Now where did Winnie put the paper? Spotting it on a coffee table, he went over and picked up a new sheet and then returned to the dining table. Now that's strange, he thought. The hole looks like it's got bigger. Oh well, the paper must have been stretched too tight. I'll have to make sure I don't do that. Then he sat down and started to pull out the pins that held the paper down, or at least he tried to. For some reason the pins wouldn't budge. "Sodding thing," Jimmy muttered. "Now the bastard pins won't come out. But I'm not having that. Winnie would take the mickey out of me for ages if I couldn't get them out." So saying, he leant further forward, braced himself with one hand and tried again. The pins still refused to move. Jimmy stood up and took a deep breath. "Those bastards are doing it deliberately, I'm sure of it," he muttered. "Well, I'll show them. They're coming out even if I have to get something to lever them. I'll try one more time, then I'll take a spoon to them." He glowered at the pins. "That'll teach them. Oh, and look at the thing. The hole's got bigger. It's bloody deliberate, I swear it is. Trying to annoy me, I can just tell." Once again, Jimmy leant over the table and reached to get a grip of one of the pins. As he did so, he noticed something strange. There appeared to be a light shining in the hole in the pattern. "I wonder what's doing that," he thought. He knew Winnie wouldn't have damaged the table, but maybe she fixed a bulb into the cork mat as a bit of fun in case he went through the paper. Perhaps there was a rule about not going through the paper. A light would definitely show if either of them did so. Standing up again, he lifted the cork mat for any wires and batteries. There weren't any. This confused him for a second. Then he realised it couldn't be a bulb anyway. That would make the pattern go wonky when the pens went over it. Something had to be causing the light though. Filled with curiosity, Jimmy leant over the pattern, lowered his head to just above it and looked into the hole. He couldn't see anything in there but light. Then he realised the hole was growing, and quite quickly. Jimmy didn't like the look of this at all. He tried to stand up and move away, but he couldn't. It was as if something held his head in place. Now thoroughly frightened, Jimmy deliberately tried to release himself from the grip of whatever was holding him in place. But his struggles were to no avail. The hole was getting bigger with every passing second. Then Jimmy felt a tug, and his head was pulled closer towards the light. The hole had now reached the size of his head, and the light seemed to be trying to drag him in to it. Jimmy pushed hard against the pull, pushing with his hands and putting all his strength into the effort. But the pull just kept growing in strength. Now his hands had sunk into the ever-widening hole, and soon his arms followed him. Terrified, Jimmy screamed for help. But then the pull suddenly grew even stronger, and he felt himself being drawn rapidly downwards. With a last scream of utter fear, Jimmy disappeared into the now gaping hole head first. Jimmy slowly woke up and opened his eyes. All around him was darkness apart from a disc of light that shone down on him. That's odd, he thought. He tried to move. He discovered that he could only move his head. The rest of his body seemed to be held immobile by some strange force. Now that's even more odd, he muttered to himself. Wonder what's causing that? Then the answer dawned on him. I'm asleep, that's what happened. I nodded off in the chair and this is all a dream. Then if I'm dreaming, would I know I'm dreaming? Or am I dreaming that I'm dreaming? And in my dream, I know I'm dreaming. No, you are not dreaming, a voice said from the darkness. You are now in our realm, and you will be punished for your evil. It was a strange voice that didn't quite sound human, and had a sort of mechanical tone to it. At the word punished, Jimmy's eyes lit up. A bit of punishment sounded pretty good to him. He couldn't think of anything evil that he'd actually done, so obviously this was all a mistake. However, he wasn't going to miss out, if he could help it. Oh yes, I've been really wicked, he replied. Then thinking quickly, I used the toilet and didn't flush it. I deserve to be punished. For a few seconds there was silence. Then the voice spoke again. The toilet? You didn't flush the toilet? Is that a euphemism for murder? A sudden whispering started in answer to the question. After a few seconds the voice spoke again. Oh, that's what a toilet is. They really are not very evolved creatures, are they? Oh well, it's obviously trying to confuse us. Well, that won't work. Begin. Jimmy felt confused by this exchange. What kind of person didn't know what a toilet was? Then his attention was grabbed by something long and quite thin sliding into the light. As it got near it, he could see it was made up of small discs, just like the one in Winnie's game, he'd realised, which was definitely strange. The thing writhed almost sinuously as it moved closer. Then it lashed out, suddenly extending to make contact with his body. Jimmy felt the small spikes digging into his flesh. Jimmy's cry of pain was quickly followed by a moan of pleasure. The thing, Jimmy realised it was some kind of whip, quickly withdrew and paused, as if confused. It then lashed out 3 more times in quick succession. Each time it brought forth the same reaction from Jimmy, who, despite the small rivulets of blood dripping from his body, was thoroughly enjoying himself. When it started moving, and it seemed to Jimmy, stared at him. The voice spoke once again. Are you enjoying this? It asked. Jimmy took a deep breath and nodded. Well, yes, I am. I'm sorry. Wasn't I meant to? No, you are not, the voice told him. We've never come across this sort of thing before, and I must say you are a very strange creature, Miss Patterson. Oh dear, I knew it was a mistake. Pity. But I'm not a miss. I'm a mister. Are you saying you're male, but you're wearing female's clothing, and your hair is styled like that of a female? The voice sounded confused. Oh, the clothes are just part of a game me and Winnie play. This isn't my real hair, it's a wig. But you are Ginny Patterson, the voice asked. No, I'm not, I'm Jimmy Patterson, Jimmy said a bit shortly. If truth be told, he was a bit offended that he hadn't gotten his name right. For a few seconds there was silence, then, A mistake has been made. Spikes will be snipped for this, mark my words. And when the responsible ones are found, they'll suffer for it, the voice thundered. Despite his ears ringing from the sudden explosion of sound, Jimmy thought quickly. Drastic punishment didn't seem fair. After all, no harm, other than a small amount that he'd received, had been done. And he'd enjoyed that. That isn't really necessary, you know, he said. No real harm has been done, and I'm sure it wasn't deliberate, and anyway I enjoyed it. And anyone can make a mistake. There was some more seconds of silence, then the voice spoke again. You don't want them to be punished, it said, sounding surprised. Jimmy shook his head. No, he replied. You really are a strange creature, the voice replied. Well, if you're certain. I am, Jimmy said firmly. Well then, the voice said, but all the same, we shall have to make sure this does not happen again. I think some extra training is required. In between which I think a stint doing some of the less than pleasant tasks that we occasionally have will persuade them to do their job properly from now on. That sounds about right, Jimmy said. I must say, you've been very good about this, the voice told him. Although in a way it's a shame it was a mistake. You made some very entertaining sounds. All the same, I do apologise for the error. Don't know what we can do to make up for it. But if you can think of something, do speak up. It only took a second for Jimmy to think of the very thing. I have an idea we could talk about, he said with a grin. After a long conversation, which Jimmy decided that he was, after all, glad it was a mistake, the whipping was intended to continue, slowly removing first his skin, then his flesh, till it reached his internal organs. The agony would have been terrible, and would have been repeated over and over forever. They came to an agreement, one that pleased both parties. If you're certain that is what you want, then that is what we'll do, the voice told him. But if there's anything else you'd like, just say. Jimmy thought for a second, then said, well, there is something else you could do. What is that? The voice asked. Before I go back, I was wondering if you could, if we could what? Jimmy gave a hopeful little smile. Hit me maybe one more time. Jimmy woke up sitting in an armchair, feeling fine. There was no soreness and no signs of any blood. For a second or two he felt confused. Had all that happened, or was it just a dream? He hoped it had been real. Would have been disappointed if it turned out to be nothing but a dream. Standing there, he walked over to the table. To his great relief, he saw the pattern had gone. All that was left was a large hole with burnt edges where it had been. Quickly, Jimmy pulled out the pins and crumpled the paper. Then he put down a fresh sheet and secured it with the pins. Picking up a couple of the wheels, he set them up and rapidly, but very carefully, he drew another pattern, making sure it was slightly different from the one Winnie had drawn. Hopefully she wouldn't notice the difference. He put the crumpled piece of paper into his backpack, stuffing it down to the bottom, underneath his everyday clothes. Then he went back to his armchair, picking up his copy of Pleasure Through Pain, and sat down to wait for Winnie to return. Jimmy had just finished reading another article on the benefits of plastic clothing pegs over wooden ones. They were easier to clean and more hygienic when used in certain parts of the body, apparently. Admittedly, this was part of the body Jimmy didn't have, but he found the article interesting nonetheless. When he heard Winnie's car drive up into a driveway, a minute later he heard Winnie's keys in the lock. Then he heard a call out, "Could you give me a hand, Jimmy? My bloody leg hurts." Jimmy jumped up from the armchair and rushed to the hallway. "What's happened?" he said anxiously, seeing Winnie holding onto the door frame, her face pale. "A silly bitch let her kids push their trolley around the car park. They were pushing it around too fast and hit my leg with it. The first aider in the store said he didn't think anything's broken, but it is painful." "I'll get you sitting down and I'll have a look at it," Jimmy told her as he helped her into the sitting room. Once Winnie was sitting in a favourite armchair, Jimmy removed her shoes and pulled her jeans off as gently as he could. Winnie's knee looked a bit swollen, and there was the beginning of a large bruise on her ankle. "Can you still bend your knee?" he asked. "Yes, but it hurts when I do. Same with my ankle." "No grouching or clicking?" "No, it just hurts." "It's probably just bruising then," Jimmy said, relieved. "You just sit there and I'll get some ice to put on your knee. I've got some good painkillers in my bag. A couple of those, a nice cup of tea, and you'll start to feel better. Thanks, Jimmy. A couple of teens painkillers would be just the thing. Then a thought occurred to her. Oh, Jimmy, I'm sorry. I don't think I'll be able to punish you tonight. Jimmy smiled. Don't worry about that, he told her. Getting you comfortable is more important. Oh, while I was out, I realised the spirograph isn't really a game, it's just a toy. She paused for a second before carrying on. For some reason, I don't think I like it. In fact, even the thought of looking at it makes me feel slightly ill. Isn't that strange? Jimmy smiled. Well, some of the patterns it makes can be somewhat strange, I suppose, he said. Tell you what, I'll take it with me. Then you won't have to look at it. That's very good of you, thanks, Winnie said, smiling. Perhaps we could just watch a DVD tonight. Would that be alright? Sounds fine, Jimmy said. Later on I'll make us our supper. That would be nice. I left the bacon on the passenger seat. I'll sort you out first, then I'll go and get it, Jimmy told her, and put it straight in the fridge. Then he grinned. I think the Marquis has had enough bacon for one day. Winnie grinned. You're right there, she said with a chuckle. Epilogue. Imagine, if you will, a huge half-circular amphitheatre. The stage at its open end containing banks upon banks of very large speakers. From these speakers comes a strange kind of music. If you listen very carefully, you will realise that the music is, in fact, made by screams. Screams both human, almost human, and definitely not human. For the Spiroverse has access not only to our world, but all worlds in our version of the universe. It can also enter other realities. Not all of them, but a goodly number. There are many of these amphitheatres throughout our Spiroverse, but this is the biggest. The same music is also sent to the smaller local ones. Now, if you were to look at the back row of this particular amphitheatre, among the thousands of discs all listening intently, you would see something that looks out of place. A tall red-haired woman with piercing green eyes, dressed in a blood-red flowing tunic that falls to her ankles, and on her woven belt there hangs a pair of scales and a scabbarded xiphos with a 24-inch blade. However, if you looked even more closely, you would see that, although definitely resembling a human, the woman was clearly not. Humans do not, as a rule, have two large black feathered wings folded behind their back. Are you enjoying the music, lady? Asked a somewhat robotic voice. The figure turned her head and smiled. She'd given up on trying to get these creatures to call her mistress. Lady was as far as they'd go. But they still did their work splendidly, and that was all you could ask of servants, really. Yes, Sir Swirly Whirly. It's very good today. Sir Swirly Whirly wasn't really his name, of course, but she'd be damned if she tried to pronounce his real one. It would probably hurt her throat, and he seemed quite happy being called Sir Swirly Whirly. The voice of the Spiroverse smiled happily. He always arranged his features to look as much like a human face as he could when talking to Nemesis, as a token of respect. We have a treat today, he said happily, so if you'll excuse me, I shall go and make the announcement. The figure smiled and said, by all means do so. Floating down to hover at the front of the stage, Sir Swirly Whirly waited till the music slowly faded and the whirring and clicking, the Spiroverse version of applause, had stopped before he spoke. Now is the time we have all been waiting for, he said, his voice echoing around the amphitheatre. Once again our star performer is with us. He paused for a second to let the excitement build. So now, let me introduce once again your friend and mine, Jimmy the Gimp. The audience went utterly wild. Jimmy Patterson was a happy man. No longer would he have to do without his deserved punishment while Winnie was visiting her old customers. Once every month while she was away, he visited his friends in the Spiroverse. This was the deal he made with them, and both sides were very happy with it. Naturally, the punishment had been moderated somewhat, being enough to hurt a fair bit but not enough to do real damage. And after every performance he gave, he was returned home in the same condition he was before he made his visit. And so, making sure his new gimp suit was firmly zipped, Jimmy nodded into the darkness and said, "I'm ready. Let's go."
Good morrow, my lovelies. DC had a few here. Deep in the shit, undercover ops. I hope you're all ready for the next instalment of the most terrifying story I've come across in my investigations into the Spiroverse. Find yourself a teddy to comfort you, a stiff drink to fortify you, and get comfy while you can. This is about to get very uncomfortable, for at least some. Part 2. Ginny Patterson's Greatest Crime. Everyone who knew her loved Ginny Patterson. She was a pretty woman in her mid-30s with light brown hair falling to just below her shoulders, bright blue eyes, and lips turned up into a constant smile. She had a kind word for everyone, and had an optimistic air about her. Everyone said that no matter how disheartened you felt, a chat with Ginny would brighten your day. Oh yes, everyone who knew her loved Ginny Patterson. But that was because they didn't know that what they saw was a mere facade. For if anyone could be described as evil, it was Ginny Patterson. Ginny Patterson sat in her reclining chair and gazed down at her latest toy. It was a young woman of somewhere around 20 years of age. She had said her name was Mandy, if Ginny remembered correctly. Not that her name was important, of course. No, what was important was that she was one of the growing number of homeless people sleeping rough in the town, which meant that it was unlikely that anyone would miss her if she disappeared. Everyone would think she simply moved on, looking for a place where begging was more fruitful. Ginny smiled at herself, remembering her other victims had all been homeless people, and their deaths hadn't attracted much attention so far. So she was sure that this one wouldn't either. In fact, she was so sure of this, she was going to take things further this time. A lot further. Her usual thing was to have her jollies, as she called them, being careful not to leave too many marks, of course, and then give her victims a massive overdose, after which she would leave their bodies in one or other of the two nearly deserted industrial estates that the town had. Both of these places were known to be haunts of local drug addicts and alkies, and another dead druggie being found in them didn't surprise anyone. But this time that wouldn't work. She'd have to get rid of the body in a place where no one would find it. She'd already found a spot she thought would do. It was a small clear area among some overgrown bushes and brambles, and a good distance away from any footpaths. That was just the right size for an unmarked grave, especially if the body was dismembered. Smiling to herself, Ginny stood up. Her new plaything would probably wake up soon, so it was time to get out of her Salvation Army uniform. Ginny owned a dry cleaning shop, which she worked at herself, and also a laundrette. Ginny had hired a woman to look after that, and do any washing that was required. She had once come across a pair of panties that had been so horribly stiff and filthy that they crackled, and nasty black flakes had fallen from the front of them when she picked them up. This was enough for Ginny, and she had hired someone as quickly as she could. She had no intention of going through that again. The laundrette had turned out to be a very useful place for her. It was where she'd got her Salvation Army uniform. It had been brought in to be cleaned, and Ginny realised that it could prove useful to her. The uniform was a bit too large for her, but that was no problem. She soon altered it. The nurse's uniform she had used for a while had also been brought into the laundrette to be washed and ironed and fitted her perfectly, without any alterations. Knowing that it would help her get more toys, Ginny had told the woman who brought it in that there'd been an accident, and after apologising profusely had paid for a new one with a cheerful smile and more apologies. As this had worked before, the Salvation Army uniform also suffered an accident, with Ginny once more apologising profusely and paying for the new one with a smile. Walking over to the couch, which was pushed against one of the walls of the outbuilding in the back garden of a comfortable little cottage a few miles out of town, Ginny removed the uniform, folded it neatly, and placed it on the cushions. Then, clad in only a cheap nylon underwear, which could be burned after she'd had her fun, she turned to the table beside it. Picking up a thin leather riding crop, she gazed at it almost lovingly. She usually liked to start with that crop. It reminded her of the old days. The people who knew about her had always wondered how Ginny had been able to afford such a nice home as the one she lived in. When asked about it by a curious acquaintance, Ginny didn't actually know anyone she would actually class as a friend. In fact, the notion of friendship seemed strange and foolish to her. Ginny had said that she'd been left a large amount of money from a relative. This was a lie, of course. If the people who knew her ever found out where her money had, and still did to a great degree, come from, they would have been surprised and shocked. Before she moved to her current home, Ginny had been a dominatrix working in London. She had taken over from the previous woman who'd run that particular house of correction, who was known as Mistress Winnie, after she'd retired. Ginny had enjoyed the work to a degree. It didn't really do it for her. She found that it just whetted her appetite for dealing out more serious pain. It did pay well, it's true, but as Ginny discovered, not nearly as well as blackmail did. Several extremely wealthy and well-known patrons visited the premises in order to get pleasure from being ordered around and made to do menial tasks and getting punished for being naughty. More than a few of them insisted on calling Ginny Nanny, which Ginny found slightly distasteful. It made her wonder what they'd actually got up to with their real nanny that they'd obviously had when they were children. These customers hadn't taken a lot of convincing that paying Ginny to keep quiet about their visits was preferable to her going to the papers, especially as she had video proof taken by hidden cameras she'd installed in one of the rooms. From one of them she'd accepted a one-off payment in return for the tapes and her promise of silence. And to be fair, Ginny had kept her word, whilst others gave her monthly gifts. Once her finances had been settled to her satisfaction, Ginny had left the business and moved to the spot where she now lived. With a shake of her head, Ginny replaced the whip on the table. She wouldn't use that first today. She had something more interesting to start with this time. After a moment's thought, she picked up a small metal-handled scalpel. This should do to start with, she thought. I can get more serious afterwards. I might as well make it last, and I've been wanting to try this ever since I read about it. And then she turned, as from behind her she heard faint sounds of movement, as Mandy began to wake up. Mandy Coleman slowly opened her eyes and found herself lying naked on a hard floor and looking up at a well-padded ceiling and what looked like some kind of pulley. This was confusing. The last thing she remembered was sitting wrapped up in a pink fluffy bathrobe, drinking a large vodka and orange on Ginny's comfortable sofa after enjoying the first shower she had had for she couldn't remember how long, and had just eaten a huge meal of spaghetti bolognese, followed by a large slice of chocolate cake and whipped cream. She remembered feeling rather sleepy, but that was to be expected. She wasn't used to such big meals. She felt even more confused when she tried to use her hands to sit up and couldn't. This, she realized, was because they were handcuffed in front of her. With a sudden shock, she also realized that her legs were also restrained at the ankles, and strangely, she seemed to be lying on a large plastic tarpaulin. Then she heard Ginny's voice say, "Good, you're awake. We can get started now." Mandy was just about to ask what it was they could get started with, when she heard a click, followed by the hum of an electric motor, and felt herself being lifted into the air by her wrists. As she rose, she could see Ginny standing in front of her, smiling. "What's happening? Why am I handcuffed? What's going on?" she asked confusedly. "We're going to have some fun, you and I," Ginny said, moving to stand behind her. "Well, I say we. But I mean, me, really. I don't suppose you'll think of it as fun, to be honest." Mandy felt the first prickling of fear edge into her brain, and she tried to swing herself round to look at Ginny. She found she couldn't do so. Her feet wouldn't move enough. "Ah, no, you won't be able to do that. If you look down, you'll see that there's a chain on your manacles that slipped into a clamp, I suppose you'd call it. That stops you twisting round. After all, I wouldn't want you moving around much now, would I? It would make things a bit difficult. Oh, and if you're thinking of calling for help, I wouldn't bother. I expect you've noticed all the padding in here. Well, that's all acoustic membrane. It's on top of several other soundproofing layers," Ginny told her, and then she laughed. "I told the people who fitted it that I was turning this building into some kind of entertainment area. Which is true, of course, just not quite the entertainment that they were thinking of. So do feel free to scream. It's not as if anyone's going to hear you." "Scream? Why would I scream? What are you going to do to me?" asked Mandy with panic in her voice. Ginny slowly reached round with her left hand and cut one of Mandy's breasts, and she viciously dug her fingers into the flesh. Maddie let out a cry of pain, and Ginny let go. "You felt that? Good. Well, that's nothing. As I've said, I'm going to have fun." And then she looked at the chains. "You know what? I think they could be a little tighter. Excuse me for a moment while I deal with it." Taking a step to the side, Ginny took hold of the winch controller and pressed a button. The winch hummed and the chains grew shorter. Mandy gave a grunt of pain as she was stretched taut. "There, that's better," Ginny told her. "I wouldn't want you to squirm around. It would make things a bit tricky." Then she raised a knife and pressed the tip of the knife against the skin of Mandy's back, and she drew it downwards an inch. Mandy gave a short hiss of pain, and a small bubble of blood formed on her skin. Ginny peered closely at the cut and smiled. "Well, now, I think that's just about right. Splendid. Now I'll carry on." Raising the knife again, she proceeded to make cuts a half-inch from each other until Mandy's back was covered in them. Then she stepped back and admired her handiwork. She felt slightly disappointed, as after her first hiss of pain, Mandy had remained silent with her teeth clamped together, determined not to give Ginny the pleasure of knowing how much that it had hurt. "Oh, it's like that, is it?" Ginny muttered, annoyed. "Well, that will soon change, believe me." And then she walked over to a table and picked up a plastic bucket before walking back behind Mandy. Digging her hands into the bucket, she drew out a handful of salt and slapped it across Mandy's shoulders, spreading it around and pushing it into the cuts. Then Mandy screamed. She couldn't help herself. It felt like her back was on fire. Ginny gave a happy grin. That was more like it. Mandy continued to scream as Ginny scooped more handfuls of salt from the bucket and spread them across the rest of her back. Stepping away from her, Ginny grinned happily. This was going well. It was now time for the next bit of fun. Walking back to the table once again, Ginny placed the scalpel back on the table and picked up the riding crop. It was time to use this, and this time she could really go for it. Returning to Mandy, Ginny got into position and swung the crop as hard as she could. The whistle it made as it went through the air was very satisfying, but not as satisfying as the smack it made when it hit Mandy's buttocks, and nowhere near as satisfying as Mandy's shriek. Grinning with pleasure, Ginny continued to rain blows across Mandy's buttocks. Eventually, Mandy's screams started to subside in volume, and then finally to cease as she passed out from the pain. Panting a bit, Ginny stepped back and surveyed the results of her exertion. Mandy's buttocks were covered in livid welts and the skin was split in places. Rivulets of blood running down her buttocks were dripping into the plastic sheet. Ginny's grin grew wider. That went well. Time to set things up for the next bit. When she woke up again, Mandy found herself sitting upright in some kind of chair, her back and buttocks throbbing with pain. She could feel the plastic sheet beneath her, but the cushions it covered felt soft. She tried to move her head, but found she couldn't. It was held in place by some kind of harness, a leather one from the feel of it. Then she tried to move her arms and legs. They too were held in place by straps, her wrists to the arms of the chair, her ankles to the legs of the thing, which caused her legs to be slightly spread. Then she noticed that for some reason her mouth was open. Automatically she tried to close it, but she couldn't. Something in the right side of her mouth was stopping her from doing so. Then she heard the sound of something being wheeled across the floor towards her. Ginny pushed the tea trolley near Mandy's head and beamed down at her captive. "Ah, you're awake again, I see," said Ginny happily. "Good. Time to carry on, then." And she turned to the trolley, and Mandy heard the soft electrical hum. Then Ginny turned back to look at Mandy. "You know, I thought getting one of these would be difficult, but it was quite easy as it turned out. You can just order them from China. Who would have thought of it, huh?" She said this before once more turning toward the trolley and picking something up. There was a high-pitched whine, and then Ginny was looking down at her again, holding the object up so Maddie could see it. It was a dentist's drill. Her eyes widening in horror, Mandy once more tried desperately to close her mouth. Seeing this, Ginny gave a laugh. "You're wasting your time and effort, you know," she said, smiling. "You've got a bite block in. Dentists use them to stop their patients biting them. At least I assume that's why they use them." Then she put the drill on the top of one of Mandy's molars and started to apply light pressure. At first Mandy tried to keep quiet, but after a couple of seconds the pain grew greater and she began to make a loud "oh" noises. But when the drill touched the nerve, her body went rigid with pain and she screamed. Ginny stepped back and grinned with pleasure. She had drilled 3 of Maddie's molars and the result was quite gratifying. Mandy's face was ashen, her body bathed in sweat. She was breathing heavily and she sat weak and shivering from the agony. Ginny walked back to the table, picked up a packet of cigarettes and took one out, and then she lit it with a disposable lighter and took a drag before walking back to Mandy. "Well now, that was interesting. I didn't know it would hurt that much. I shall have to remember that. I've always had a jab to stop it hurting, of course, so I wouldn't have known." She took another drag of the cigarette, and then a thought occurred to her. "Oh, where are my manners? Would you like a couple of puffs?" Using a pair of needle-nosed pliers, she removed the bite block from Mandy's mouth and then placed the cigarette between Mandy's lips. "Don't take too many puffs," Ginny told her. "Smoking's bad for you." And then she laughed. "Oh dear, what am I saying? That's stupid of me. Bad for you. Oh dear, she said, and then started laughing again. Finally, Ginny got control of herself and the laughter stopped. Leaning forward, she removed the cigarette and looked at it. "Oh, look at that," she cried, straightening up. "You smoked more than half of it, you greedy bitch, and you bum-sucked it. That's just disgusting." Reaching out, she cupped Mandy's chin in her hand and quickly pushed it upwards. Mandy's teeth came together with some force and she went rigid once again as the pain lanced through her jaw, and she gave an inarticulate cry of pain. Ginny stood back and glowered at her. "Well, I'm not going to finish this, I can tell you that," she said angrily. The thought of stubbing the thing out on one of Maddie's breasts came to her mind, but then another idea occurred to her. So great was the pain in her jaw, Mandy hardly noticed as Ginny slowly pushed her knees further apart. Then Ginny suddenly thrust her hand between the unresisting thighs. There was a soft sizzle, and the smell of burnt hair and flesh, and Mandy gave her loudest scream yet. Her body convulsed violently for a few seconds, but then the pain became too much and she passed out. Ginny slowly removed the now extinguished cigarette and dropped it to the floor as she walked back to the table. Oh dear, I don't think she's going to last much longer, she thought sadly. What a pity. I'd hoped she'd be stronger. Still, she was half starved when I got to her, so I suppose that was to be expected. And then she brightened up. Never mind, there's plenty more from where she came from. And she looked down at the table. I suppose I'd better try out the new thing. Certainly holds some promise, I think. The new thing was a dowling rod that had different sized spiky discs along a quarter of its length. The rod had been tapered so that the smaller discs could be fitted. The discs had been drilled and slid along the rod and then glued together to form a sort of spiky, stepped cone. Then a plastic domed cap had been glued to the end to complete the cone. Finally, she'd taken a small file and made the spikes a little bit pointier. Scattered around lay what remained of the contents from the 5 Spirograph deluxe sets, plus one opened but complete set. Jim frowned at it. Bloody thing, she thought. Don't know why I bought 6 of them. I'd worked out that 5 would be enough. She sighed. Never mind. I dare say I'll think of the use for the extra one at some stage. Oh well, I better get things ready for the grand finale. Mandy finally regained consciousness and immediately wished she hadn't. Once again her back felt like it was on fire, and this time her buttocks had joined in. Mandy guessed that Ginny had used the salt on her again. Her jaw was throbbing painfully, and although the agony between her legs had subsided slightly, she still felt a great deal of pain there. Then she realized that she was face down across the arms of the chair. Her upper body was strapped firmly down with her arms and ankles chained to its legs, but this time her head was free to move. Hearing footsteps, Mandy turned her head and saw Ginny moving towards her. She held some things in her hands, but Mandy couldn't quite make out what they were, but she was certain they would cause her yet more pain. Ginny smiled at her and said, "It's nearly over now. Just a bit more and it'll all be over." Mandy glared at her. "You'll rot in hell for this, you bitch," she said through gritted teeth. "Unless they can find somewhere worse for you to go." Ginny laughed. "Will I now? Well, maybe I'll be seeing you there." Mandy was about to give vent to a stream of obscenities, but suddenly some different words flashed into her mind. There were 7 of them, and in a voice that didn't quite sound like her own, she spoke them. "Evil comes to she who does evil."
After a hard day's graft, nothing quite relaxes me like a nice cold pint of vodka. God, dear. So don't be an arse. Get a weapon collector glass.
Mandy glared at her. "You'll rot in hell for this, you bitch," she said through gritted teeth. "Unless they can find somewhere worse for you to go." Ginny laughed. "Will I now? Well, maybe I'll be seeing you there." Mandy was about to give vent to a stream of obscenities, but suddenly some different words flashed into her mind. There were 7 of them, and in a voice that didn't quite sound like her own, she spoke them. "Evil comes to she who does evil." Ginny stopped in her tracks. That wasn't Mandy's voice, and she didn't much care for the words it spoke, and the way that they were said made them sound sort of final. Then she shook herself and thought, it's probably the pain that she's in that made her voice sound different. And anyway, words can't hurt you. Then she walked forward again until she was standing behind her victim. "I think I should warn you. I think this is going to really hurt. At least I hope so. So I took a bit of time making it, and I'd be disappointed if it doesn't do the job." Then she bent down. She laid 2 of her items, a large plastic bag and a long zip tie, carefully on the floor beside her. Then she straightened up and placed her left hand in the small of Mandy's back. Then she grinned broadly. "Before I start, I have a question," she said, trying not to laugh. "Did you take it up the arse?" And then she burst into laughter. After a couple of minutes, Ginny stopped laughing and took a deep breath. "Oh, that was funny. Do you take it up the arse? Well, it's not like you have a choice, to be entirely honest, so brace yourself." So saying, she once again placed her left hand on the small of Mandy's back, raising her new spiky thing and pushed it between Mandy's buttocks. Mandy gave a yelp followed by a squeal, which was quickly followed by a screech as the spikes dug in. Ginny pushed harder and Mandy desperately clenched her buttocks, trying to ignore the increasing pain as the spikes sank into her flesh. "That isn't going to work, you know," Ginny told her, giving the thing a bit of a wiggle and a twist, and pushed even harder, and again Mandy started screaming as Ginny ground the thing inwards. Hidden by Mandy's screams as they were, Ginny didn't hear the frantic clicking and whirring sounds coming from the table behind her, and pulled the thing out slightly before thrusting it in even harder. She repeated this several times and then stopped to take a quick breather. "This is harder work than I thought," she told Mandy conversationally. "Perhaps the back part's too wide. I shall have to modify it a bit before I use it again, I think." And then she started thrusting it forward again. Behind her, the clicking and whirring sounds had ceased. In their place, a strange glow had appeared on the surface of the table. Ginny stopped once more. Mandy's screams had subsided to mere moans, and her breathing had started to become ragged. "Oh well, time to finish things, I suppose," Ginny thought, and bent down to pick up the plastic bag and zip tie. That was when she became aware of a sound, like a slowly pulsing electrical groan, and a strange change to the light. Turning round, Ginny was shocked to see a strange fluorescent green glow through which streaks of blood-red lightning flickered with every pulse of sound coming from the middle of the table. "What the hell is that?" Ginny muttered. She had to admit she didn't like the look of it one little bit. She had heard of something called ball lightning, and for a couple of seconds she wondered if that was what it was. But it didn't look anything remotely like a ball, so it couldn't be that. No matter what it was, it looked dangerous, and so keeping her eyes on it, just in case, Ginny started to move towards the door. As she watched, She saw that the glow was increasing in size. Fuck, it's going to blow up, Ginny thought, and started to move more quickly, still looking at it with strange fascination she couldn't explain. She was only a little way from the door when she felt something pull at her. At first she thought she was imagining it, but then she realized that the pull was growing rapidly stronger. A feeling of terror engulfed her, and she turned and sprinted for the door. By the time she reached it, the force pulling her had grown so strong that she could only just resist it. Crying with fear, she flung the door open and almost threw herself into the garden. Once out of the building, Ginny felt the pull lessen considerably and began to calm down a bit. That was strange. I must be doing some strange kind of magnetism thing, she thought, and she turned round and looked at the light once more. It was still growing, and the sound was getting louder. Whatever it is, it's definitely going to blow up, she thought. Then she remembered that Mandy was still there and would be caught in the blast, and she had a sudden feeling of sadness. She's bound to die in the explosion, she thought. What a shame. I was so looking forward to finishing off myself. Then she brightened up. Never mind, though, plenty more from where she came from. Smiling to herself and anticipating the pleasure of having a new, and hopefully a bit stronger, plaything, Ginny felt the pull on her grow stronger. Turning away, she started to move further into the garden towards the house. Then she heard a voice, the same one that had come out of Mandy's mouth, say in an icy cold tone, "Permission granted. Fetch her." Ginny quickly spun around to see who it was that had spoken. What she saw filled her with fear so great she froze, unable to move, and so she stood there, staring as a huge cloud of whirring, glistening discs erupted from the inside of the light and swirled around like an enormous swarm of bees. For perhaps 2 seconds they swirled around as if looking for something. Then they spotted their target and flew towards the staring Ginny. That was enough for Ginny. Tearing her eyes away from the sight, she turned and fled, giving vent to a terrified wail as she ran towards the house and what she assumed would be safety. She never reached it. Not that it would have done her any good if she had. The discs quickly caught up and surrounded her. Ginny looked wildly around for some way of escape, but there was none. Swiftly, the discs, and she now saw that they were discs from the Spiroverse set she bought, which filled her with both surprise and, for some reason, even more terror than she'd already experienced. They moved closer and closer, and then, with sudden darting movements, they rushed in, their spikes digging into her flesh and quickly lifting her off her feet into the air. They began to carry her back towards the outbuilding and the green light. As she was drawn closer to the dome of green light, the discs slowed slightly, and Ginny heard the voice say, "Really? You want me to do what?" There was a pause, and then the voice continued. "I don't really get involved in that sort of thing." Another pause, and then, "Very well. As a favour. Just this once, then, but don't expect me to do this again." Then more discs flew out from the dome. Once the new string of discs was clear of the light, the discs carrying Ginny moved forward again. With a last drawn-out scream, Ginny was carried into the dome and disappeared. The second stream of discs moved quickly to where the unconscious Mandy, who was by now as near to death as it was possible to be without actually being dead, lay, and surrounded her. There was a sound like a circular saw cutting through metal and webbing, followed by a faint clink as the chains holding her hit the floor. Then the discs lifted up her limp body and carried it into the green light. Once this had been done, the light slowly shrank and dimmed until, with a loud crack, it disappeared, leaving the table in its place. The table looked exactly as it had done before the light had appeared, apart from 2 things. There was no sign of the Spiroverse sets, apart from some shattered pieces where Mandy had been, and the table now had a large circular burn mark, the inside edges of which were serrated on its surface. Ginny felt a sharp shock of pain lance through her head and awoke to find herself held in an upright, spread-eagled position in a wide circle of bright light. Outside the circle there was only inky blackness. Then a voice spoke. It was a voice Ginny hadn't heard before, and she wasn't exactly keen on it. It was the sort of voice that Hollywood would give an evil robot. "Did I wake up Paul hurt?" "We hope that it did," the voice said, and then it paused for a second before continuing. "Normally we'd let you wake up in your own time, but in your case, we couldn't bring ourselves to wait." Ginny peered into the darkness, trying to see who it was who was talking, but she could see nothing through the impenetrable darkness. "Where am I?" she asked. "Who are you and why am I here?" "You are in our realm," the voice replied. "As to who we are vengeance." There was another pause. "Oh yes, and retribution. I always seem to forget that bit. And why are you here?" "To receive punishment, of course." "Punishment?" Ginny cried. "Not for having a bit of fun with those useless people. Surely, if anything, I should be rewarded for ridding the world of some of their kind. They are of no use to anyone, and just make wherever they are look dirty and untidy." "You will be punished for that." "Yes," the voice told her. "But your punishment will be even worse than usual, due to the much greater crime you have committed." "Greater crime?" Ginny asked, confused. "What greater crime?" "You used us," the voice said angrily. "Us! And not only that, you glued some of us to a stick, and then you made them participate in your wickedness. We couldn't even free them, so we've had to put them out of their misery. For that crime, you shall be punished very harshly. Normally, the punishments we deal out are over quite quickly. They're painful, of course, and we do repeat them forever, but each individual session of punishment doesn't last that long. But with you, we're going to take our time." There was yet another pause, and then the voice said more calmly, "Enough talk. Let us begin." From out of the surrounding darkness, Ginny saw 4 discs around a foot in diameter float into view. They looked like spirograph discs, but this time they were made of some kind of metal that glinted when they entered the light, and their spikes looked larger and much sharper than the plastic ones. Ginny felt a feeling of terrible dread fill her as they moved closer to her, each one hovering beside her. Then they started to glow, first red and then white hot. Then, when they were only about a foot away from her, they began to spin. Faster and faster they span, and finally, realizing what was about to happen, Ginny started screaming, and carried on screaming as they bit into her fingers and toes, quickly severing them and letting them float away into darkness. The smell of burnt flesh filled Ginny's nostrils as the white-hot discs cauterized her wounds as they sliced into her, causing even more pain. Then the discs floated up into her wrists and ankles and slicing them into them. By this time they moved more slowly, and the high-pitched whine of their teeth, biting first into flesh and then bone and then flesh again, seemed to Ginny to go on and on. So loud was the sound that even Ginny's screams couldn't completely drown it out. After this they continued up her arms and legs, slowly removing an inch of them at a time. All the while Ginny could see small flecks of her blood, flesh and bone floating in front of her before they too disappeared into the surrounding darkness. Finally, the discs reached her elbows and knees. For a second or two they just floated there, as if thinking. Then they moved on and started cutting into the arm and leg just above the 2 joints. Then, satisfied with their work, they slowly moved out of the light back into the darkness. Ginny's screaming finally subsided. "Oh, you bastards, she moaned, her head drooping forward. "But at least my punishment is over." "Over?" the voice said with a hideous laugh. "Oh no, it's not over. In fact, We've only just started. Raising her head, Ginny saw 6 much smaller discs floating in front of her face. They seemed to be made of the same metal as the others, but these ones did not appear to be heated up. Starting to spin, the discs moved closer and closer to Ginny's face. Ginny tried to turn her head, but found that it was firmly held in place. Then she realized where the discs were heading. They're going to go in my mouth, she thought. They're going to slice my tongue up. Desperately, she clamped her mouth tight shut in an attempt to stop them. Unfortunately for Ginny, the discs didn't care whether her mouth was open or closed. It made no difference to them. Starting to spin, they carried on moving towards Ginny's mouth. Then they made contact, ripping Ginny's lips to shreds and slicing into her teeth and gums. Ginny opened her mouth and screamed. It didn't make any difference. The disc just moved downwards and continued cutting. Once they'd finished there, they moved upwards and dealt with that part of her mouth. Eventually, they stopped cutting and slicing and moved away, leaving Ginny to finish screaming. Her teeth sliced vertically in half, and her gashed lips and gums pouring blood. For 2 minutes, nothing else happened, and Ginny was beginning to hope that it was all over. But then the voice spoke again. "Sorry about the wait," it said, "but we're trying to decide on what to do next. We've decided now, though, so here it comes." Ginny groaned in despair. When did this torture end? She wondered. Then she saw the small discs return, only this time they were glowing red hot. "Oh, fuck, what are they going to do?" Ginny asked. There was no reply. She was soon to find out. Suddenly dropping to below her waist, the discs first moved between the stumps of her legs. Then they shot upwards. Ginny's scream was, like Mandy's, her loudest yet, but the discs didn't just stay like a cigarette. They pushed deeper in, their spikes gouging into her whilst instantly cauterizing the gashes they created. The discs remained inside her for a full minute, and then slowly exited her ruined vagina and floated off into the darkness. This time, though, Ginny didn't have to wait long for the next installment of her punishment. From out of the darkness, Ginny saw something slowly moving towards her. At first she didn't recognize it, but as it came closer she realized what it was, and her eyes widened in horror. It was the same thing she'd used on Mandy, only this one was larger, and the discs had been arranged so as to turn into a pointed drill. Slowly the thing rose up and moved over her head, and Ginny felt her leg stumps being lifted until she was in a slightly bent forward sitting position. And although she couldn't see it, she knew the thing was dropping lower and lower behind her back. Then she heard the sounds of the discs beginning to rotate, and she started to scream. And as the drill's teeth dug into her buttocks, spraying out pieces of skin, fatty tissue, flesh and blood just to float away into the surrounding blackness, the screams grew louder. Finally, the giant drill withdrew. Well now, that was entertaining. I particularly liked the sort of staccato effect the vibrations had on your screen. In fact, this has decided us to use you as a testbed. I think that's the word you teachers use. But it's time for a break, I think. So the next thing will be the last for now. We shall have some other interesting things to inflict upon you shortly. Ginny was in far too much pain to understand what was said, and just groaned, her chin resting on her chest as she was moved back to a standing position. Then she heard the sound of 2 very large discs beginning to spin, and she raised her head to look at them. These discs looked different. They were made of metal and shined more brightly than the other ones, and they were spinning much more quickly. The discs slowed until one was level with her waist and the other with her armpits. And then suddenly they moved fast, very fast, one biting into her body just above the hips, the other one slicing into her right arm. Ginny had started to scream as soon as the discs started to move, and for a second she couldn't work out why she wasn't making any noise anymore. Then, as her upper body floated free, she realized The last thing she heard before her mind plummeted into darkness was that horrible robotic voice saying, "That was too quick. I don't believe she even felt it. Slow it down next time." Epilogue. Andy woke up with a feeling of contentment. She'd been having a lovely dream. She remembered quaint stone cottages, green fields, and the carefree laughter of happy children playing in the street. There had been adults there too, who had looked after the children, and they too were happy. Sitting up, she realised she was lying in a hospital bed. "What the hell am I doing here?" she thought, and a faint memory of chains, straps, and being in agony flickered through her mind before quickly fading away. Giving a little laugh, Mandy muttered, "That must have been one hell of a nightmare." Then she heard a strangely accented woman's voice saying, "Oh good, you're awake at last." Turning her head to see who had said that, she saw a woman of around 30, with long, flowing, dark brown hair and blue eyes smiling down at her. Pushing herself into a sitting position, Mandy said, "I don't want to seem stupid or anything, but who are you and what am I doing here?" The woman looked at her closely. "So you don't remember then? Well, you're here because I found you unconscious. You didn't look too well. So here you are. As for my name, you can call me Ellie." Mandy looked around the room. "This isn't an hospital ward," she said, sounding worried. "It's a private room. I can't pay for this." "Oh, don't you worry about that," Ellie told her. "It's all taken care of." "That's extremely kind of you," Mandy said, and then a thought occurred to her. "Just in case, I think it's only fair to tell you that I'm not gay," she said, carefully trying not to offend her benefactor. Ellie laughed. "Oh my, the world certainly has changed over the last years. Don't worry, I wasn't expecting any sexual favours from you. Now then, I'd just like to help those who need help." She stood up. "Well, now you're feeling better, I'll be going. They will discharge you in a couple of days, I expect." Then she pulled a piece of paper from her jacket pocket and placed it on the cabinet beside Mandy's head. "Oh, I nearly forgot. I got you this. It's probably worthless, but you never know your luck." She looked into Mandy's eyes as if she was peering into her soul. After a few seconds, she said seriously, "I think you're going to have a good life, Mandy Cole. Be sure you use it wisely." And then she walked out of the room. Mandy looked at the piece of paper on the cabinet. It was a lottery ticket for Euro Millions. "I'll be lucky to win a fiver with that," she thought. Still, it was kind of her to get one, I suppose. Then she suddenly realised something. "I never thought to ask her what her last name was," she thought. "How strange. I wonder if the hospital would tell me. I'd like to try and pay her back somehow." Mandy never did find out her benefactor's last name. The hospital refused to give her that information. Confidentiality rules, they told her. But Mandy had a weird feeling that they didn't know what it was either. It was not until a couple of hours had passed that another thought came into her mind. Wait a minute. How did she know my name? I never told her that. In the corridor outside Mandy's room, a tall, green-eyed, red-haired woman wearing a black dress that reached to just below her knees looked at her sister. "Ellie? Really? Ellie?" she asked. "My real name would have meant nothing to her, and Ellie is close enough, I think," was the reply. Her sister sighed and shrugged. "If you say so. I did see that ticket. I see you did that ticket thing again. How much does she get? 100,000? 200,000? Her sister's reply made us flutter in surprise. "How much?" "She has a lot to do, and the money will help her do it." "You do know she's an alcoholic, don't you? She'll drink it all." "Oh, I dealt with that. No one can drink that much anyway. Besides, I had a long talk with her while she was staying with me. I trust her to do the right thing." Her sister sighed. "I've always said you're too trusting." I think I'm right about this one, but I suppose we shall have to wait and see, her sister replied. Now, what do you say to a shopping trip and a good dinner in Paris? I think we both deserve a little rest and relaxation. Sounds good to me. Will you do the honours? Certainly, the brown-haired woman replied, and gave a nonchalant wave with her right hand. The air shimmered for a moment, and then a view of a Parisian alleyway appeared in front of them. She took a step towards it. But what if you're wrong, and she uses that money for wicked purposes? Her sister suddenly asked. Elios turned to look at her sister. I'm certain she will not, she said with a smile, and then her face turned sorrowful. But if she does, well, that's where you'll come in, isn't it, Nemesis? And then she turned back to the portal and stepped through it. Nemesis gave a grim smile. Yes, I suppose it is, she said, and followed her sister through the portal. Ginny Patterson woke up once again. She couldn't remember how many times she'd gone through the agony of the Spiroverse's punishment. And in a way she was lucky. The memory of the last session had been wiped from her mind. This was not out of any kindness on the part of the Spiros, however. It was because the last session had been a bit of a disaster. The discs had carefully sliced away all the flesh from her head, leaving skulls shining whitely in the light. Only her eye untouched, and then a shining reflective disc had flown up to her face and let her see what had been done to her. Ginny had taken one look and screamed. This scream, though hadn't lasted long, something went clang in her mind and she went totally insane. The sight of her skull thrashing from side to side, her eye rolling and gleaming with madness as the tongue protruded and flapped from side to side, the scream turning into an insane, gibbering laugh, frightened even the Spiros a little bit. They quickly stopped the session there and then. It took them a fair bit of work playing around with her mind to bring her back to sanity. Needless to say, they were not going to try that one again. So, Ginny looked with sane eyes at the discs that were moving towards her and sobbed, knowing that this was how she was going to spend eternity, tortured over and over again, knowing there would be no reprieve from her suffering. It would continue forever. So maybe you'll think of that before you do any harm to other people. Because this is not a place that you want to visit.